be a little bit different in how I approach my reflection. I'm going to share 3 more stories because I gather that many people, at least the ones that I've spoken to, really haven't had an opportunity to encounter the Sikh tradition in their lives in any kind of deep way. I wonder, is anyone here, have you had a chance to really encounter the Sikh tradition? I was going to dub that person, and Lori, my assistant. and someone over here as well. Okay, good. So what I'm going to do is take some time to introduce you to some of the philosophies of this tradition, which actually has quite a lot of resonance with our tradition. They don't believe in proselytizing, and one of the message that they preach in many ways was meant to transcend any one religious tradition and look for harmony, especially amongst Hinduism and Islam, where in India there had been great conflicts between the peoples of these 2 faiths. And in fact, Guru Nanak was raised in a Hindu family, but lived in an area that was dominated by Islam for much of his life. He was born in 1469 in a small town called Talwandi, and his father, Mehta Kalu, was a man of worldly affairs who was a well-respected tax collector for the governor. His mother's name was Tripta, and I love this. He had a sister named Nanaki, an older sister, for whom he was named Nanak, and it means unique one. So they had a unique daughter, actually without whom Nanak probably wouldn't have been able to flourish, because his father really misunderstood him. A man of worldly affairs can have difficulty with a son of spiritual affairs. And in fact, this first story that I want to share is about that clash of their perspectives. His father continued to grow very frustrated with Nanak, who he feared would never be able to support a family and children. So he suggested that perhaps Nanak might want to till the fields. And Nanak replied, "Make your body the field, your mind the harvester. Sow the seeds of goodness. Let modesty be the water. Irrigate it with God's name. The seeds will then sprout, and you can watch your home prosper." "Would you like to open a shop then?" asked his exasperated. And Nanak broke into song. "Make this ever-dying body your shop. Stock the warehouse of contemplation with the merchandise of his true name. Good deeds will pay for the traveling expenses. You shall bring your profits home when you arrive in the land of the formless one." I love these words because on one hand, they are so true. If we invest in spiritual good deeds, in some sense we take that goodness with us wherever we go. And yet, I can't imagine that there may not be at least one parent in the room who can imagine this conversation with their 22-year-old about how it's going to be important to get a job that pays for dinner. So finally, Kalu says, well, maybe trading would suit his son's restless temperament. So he makes one more attempt. He gives Nanak 20 silver rupees and asks him to go to the neighboring town and buy salt, sugar, and spices at wholesale, and then he could sell it for a profit. He can wander and talk to holy people and just, make a little money along the way. Invest wisely, he advised his son. And he sent Bala, a Hindu man, to accompany him, since this would be Nanak's first trading trip. On their way to the town, Nanak and Bala passed through a forest where they saw a gathering of Hindu holy men in meditation. Some were standing in water with their eyes closed, some cross-legged, deep in prayer, some rested under trees reading sacred texts, and some just stood there, joining hands, facing towards the sun. Nanak was fascinated, and so he stopped to make conversation. Bala begins to feel uneasy. Nanak should be on his way to finish the task that his father had given him, and not stopping to talk once again to holy men. But Nanak could not be convinced to leave. Nanak discovered that these holy men had not eaten for days, and so he offered them the 20 rupees. But they refused, saying that money was of no use. They had no utensils, no pots, no pans. They couldn't cook food. So what would they do with 20 rupees? So Nanak decides to go to town. He buys rice and lentils, sugar and fuels and pots and pans, runs back to the group of holy men and cooks a meal for them. And he is showered with blessings. Nanak was aware of his father's temper, so when they did return home, he decided to sort of hang on the outskirts of the village. And Bala went and broke the news to Kalu, who took a stick and went looking for his son. But Bala ran to Rai Bular, who was actually their landlord, another defender, and someone who really understood the gifts that Nanak had to offer. "Where are the 20 rupees?" Kalu asked Nanak. Rai Bular, that landlord, said, "You unhappy man, you shout at Nanak for the sake of 20 rupees. And Nanak says, "I traded the 20 rupees for a blessing. I thought it was the best bargain out there." Rai Bular told Kalu not to treat Nanak like an ordinary person, but of course, Kalu despaired at what he viewed as his son's aimlessness. Well, I would say that he was pretty well aimed, because while he may not have had the easiest time providing dinner every night, there are today 25 million followers of the Sikh Dharam, or the Sikh way of life. And here in the United States, there are estimates of somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million followers. And interestingly, of those followers, there are about 200,000 converts. Now remember, the Sikhs don't proselytize. They don't believe that theirs is the only path to God. They, like us, believe that there are many paths to the truth. But their ways and Nanak and the ensuing Guru's teachings are so alluring that, in fact, hundreds of thousands have converted. The word Sikh means disciple or learner. You may have seen the symbol of Sikhism, which is called Khanda, and what you find in the center is a double-edged sword representing the authority of God, and the two sides of that are to stand for freedom and justice. The circle represents the unbroken bonds of the Sikh with God, and also asserts the nature of God, who has no beginning and no ending and is infinite according to their theology. The two blades around the side represent worldly and spiritual freedom. And you'll find this symbol on all of the gurdwaras, or the Sikh holy temples. And it's important to talk about worldly and spiritual freedom, in many ways embodied in Kalu, his father, and in Nanak, because there is not a rejection of worldly affairs. All of the gurus had families, I think, except for one who died at the age of 7 or 8. But all that grew into adulthood still had means of earning a living and had a family. And they felt it was really important that their holy people really be grounded in the life of the same life as their followers experienced. The word guru means teacher. Gu is darkness and Ru is light. And there were 10 gurus, and only one existed at any time. And the 11th guru is actually the Sikh holy book. It is the continuous living guru to this day, called the Guru Granth Sahib. The holy book consists not only of verses written by Guru Nanak and others of the Sikh gurus, but it also is bound together with the writings of Muslim and Hindu holy men, and very intentionally, people coming from different classes. And so right there in their sacred text is an assertion of the wisdom in many world religions, like we talk about every week, and also an assertion that all are equal. Their temples, the gurdwaras, which means door of the guru, are open and available for prayers 7 days a week, and very observant Sikhs would come to the temple twice a day. But, of course, there is the sort of orthodox understanding of Sikhism, and then there's what ordinary Sikhs do. And so they have a tradition like us of a Sunday prayer time. And their Sunday prayers are about 45 minutes of music and kirtan, that music we started with, and then about 45 minutes of this, actually, of their Granthi speaking. Services end with a special prayer, and then following the service, they open the Granth Sahib at random, choose a verse wherever it lands, and then that's their guidance for the day. So there are the set prayers that every Sikh is supposed to say at home, in the morning and the evening, and before going to sleep. And there are, of course, prayers that are just said all the time because someone is in need of healing or something has arisen in somebody's life. And I really had the benefit of meeting with Jatinder Singh Sawhney, who is a devout Sikh who lives in Paramus, and met with him to talk about his community of Glenrock and how he understands Sikhism to be unfolding in his life. And so all of my reflections are really aided by that. Following the prayers and the service is perhaps one of the most important elements of the service. And I was really inspired. I thought, this might be something we can try to do in some way. Every Sikh temple has a dining room, the langar, where people share a meal together. And this has started with Guru Nanak. And you have to imagine, in the 15th century, how radical this practice was, because everyone in the whole community was welcome. You did not have to be Sikh. The Golden Temple, which is their equivalent of the Catholic Vatican, today serves 70,000 meals a day for this longer following the service. And on a special holiday like today is, 140,000 meals to everyone who needs food. So you have people of all classes, there's no caste, everyone sits on the floor, and Muslims, Hindus, people of no religion, Sikhs, everyone sits together. Those who have no food at home, those who have food at home, it doesn't matter. And in fact, the third guru, Amar Das, wouldn't see anybody unless that person had joined in the langar. He wouldn't even see Emperor Akbar, the great ruler of India, until he agreed to sit down at that community meal on the floor with everybody else. And they serve vegetarian food as a way to honor different faith traditions. This was interesting, maybe something for us to think about, because of course the Hindus don't eat meat, well, cows, and the Muslims can't eat meat unless it's been prepared in a certain way. And actually the Sikh, really the devout Sikhs, abstain from alcohol, tobacco, and meat. So this is to honor, even though they're not all vegetarians, they're trying to serve food that everyone can eat. Here's a quote from the Guru Granth Sahib. God first created light, then God created all the living creatures, and from the divine light the whole creation sprang. Why then should we divide human creatures into different classes, says Guru Nanak. And I mentioned earlier about the importance of women, and there are definitely women granthis in this tradition, but as Dr. Singh told me, in the Golden Temple, women are not allowed to sing as a part of that kirtan, and there's special places reserved behind the singers, really sort of a sacred space for 20 guests, and women are never allowed to sit there. And so he just wanted to illustrate that when we're studying, and I think this was such a great point, I wanted to share it with you, sometimes when we study traditions, we learn about principles that they uphold, and then sometimes in action, they may not always honor that. So while women have been asserted to be equal the whole entire time, they haven't always been able to follow that faithfully. And I think it's a good thing for us to think about. Would we be judged as honoring the inherent worth and dignity of every human being if there was a television camera following us around every moment? So I thought that what he shared about his own faith is a good reflection for us to think about with our faith. Now, for the millennials, they are constantly followed around and post when they veer from their standards. So maybe in the future that will be a different comment. The basic tenets of Sikhism are to avoid the 5 evils, which are lust, anger, greed, attachment to worldly wants, and ego. The Guru Nanak's teachings that are very important, that help you avoid these, are Nam Japna, to meditate on God's name as much as possible. Kirat Karna, to earn an honest living, there's that worldly peace. Van Chakna, to share our time and our earnings with needy people. Sikhs were instructed to give 10% of their income to good causes, to spend 10% of their time in prayer, and 10% of their time doing voluntary work. Really, a lot of these values resonate so much with our understandings. The afterlife, there's an understanding, they believe in reincarnation, that one's soul never dies, and ultimately what the hope is union with God, called transmigration. But when we die, we will not be judged by the color of our skin or by our religion, but by our actions. The reason I wanted to talk about this today, too, is that I, like you, have probably noticed in the papers how many crimes have happened against Sikhs since September 2011. And it's because people confuse the men and women who wear the turban for Muslims. And I've actually preached on Islam a few times, but I realized I had never talked about the Sikh tradition and how important it is for us to really understand this religion, which has been so misunderstood. So there are 5 ways that you might recognize one of these devout Sikhs, the Khalsa, the baptized Sikhs, who have in their name Sikh if they're a boy, and also Kaur, princess, if they're a girl. You have the kesh, the uncut hair, and that's a symbol of God's gift. That's why you're not supposed to cut it off. There's the comb, which shows tidiness and discipline of a Sikh follower. There's the kirpan, the sword that they have, which represents a symbol of justice and a willingness to fight against oppression wherever they see it. They wear kach, which are short trousers, which shows their restraint and their readiness for actions. Guru Nanak talked about how these loose flowing clothes that many Indians of his time wore were not very practical. And so these kacha were much more practical for certain kinds of action. And then they wear a kara, a steel bracelet, a symbol of unity and faith, a symbol to remember God, who, again, is infinite with no beginning and no ending. And I want to end with a story which I think highlights this theology. And for us, we talk very much about the God within our hearts. And we even, at the end, are going to sing a song that references that following this story. And he had 4 legendary journeys, and this was his journey to Mecca. So Nanak and his companion Mardana joined a trading caravan to cross the mountain passes into Afghanistan and then Iran. From a small port in the Persian Gulf, they joined a group of pilgrims and sailed for Mecca, disembarking at Jeddah. Nanak met some Muslim holy men there. Wearing blue robes, a turban, and a necklace of bones, and with a prayer rug tucked under his arm, he looked like a Muslim himself. But it was difficult to judge from his appearance alone. "Are you a Hindu or a Muslim?" asked the holy men. When Nanak told them he was a Hindu, they reprimanded him, "Go back." But Nanak continued his journey, joining a pilgrim caravan with several hundred camels, and finally arrived in Mecca. One day, Nanak fell asleep in a mosque, with his feet pointing towards the mihrab, a niche that shows the direction of the Kaaba, which is, of course, the direction of the pilgrimage to Mecca, that very central house of God. The mosque attendant was absolutely outraged. "How dare you sleep with your feet in the direction of the Kaaba?" he shouted, shaking Nanak. "Forgive me," said Nanak, "please drag my feet to whichever direction where God is not." The irate attendant pulled Nanak's feet to the north and saw the mihrab move in that direction. He moved Nanak's feet to the east, and the mihrab moved in that same way. And when he dragged Nanak's feet to the south, the mihrab moved once again. The holy men and pilgrims gathered around Nanak to find out how this could have happened. Mardana, his companion, played the rebeck, almost a precursor to the violin, and Nanak sang a hymn in which he said that God was everywhere, in every direction, and the true God was within. So there are all these wonderful stories about Guru Nanak's travels, and as Dr. Singh explained to me, while the stories contain miracles, the Granthi dwells less on the miracles and more on the message behind the story. There's a story about Nanak coming to a farm where there was rotten fruit everywhere, and he set foot on the farm and all of the fruit became ripe again. He said, we don't talk about whether or not that literally happened. We talk about how being in the presence of the words of the Granth Sahib, we become ripe again. So I think it's important to remember that as I share a couple of their stories today. And I'll close with the closing of Guru Nanak's life. According to legend, when he was dying, there was a great disagreement about who should care for his body and honor him after he was dead and gone. The Hindus wanted to cremate their saint, and the Muslims wanted to bury their saint. And so, according to legend, when they lifted the sheet, all that was left was a bed of flowers. So the Hindus took half of the flowers and cremated them, and the Muslims took half of the flowers and buried them. So today, let us honor that there is another religious tradition who affirms the wisdom of the world religions, who affirms that we are all one people. We are, all of us, human beings with worth and dignity, and who constantly enact deeds to eradicate differences of class, differences of gender, differences of race. To me, that is a table I would be happy to say grace before. May it be so. Will you please rise and